The last thing Colony Varus ever broadcast was a weather report. I know, because I was the one monitoring the deep-range listening post at the edge of the Kepler Reach when it came through. A calm, automated voice, describing mild wind patterns in the southern farming districts, a light rain expected by morning, temperatures suitable for the harvest season, ordinary, completely ordinary. And then the signal stopped. Not static, not interference, not the scrambled noise of damaged equipment. Just silence, the kind that has weight to it, the kind you feel pressing against your eardrums even though you know that makes no sense in a vacuum. I sat in front of my console for 11 seconds before I started running diagnostics, because some part of my brain refused to accept that a world of 900,000 people had simply gone quiet. The thermal bloom showed up on passive sensors 4 minutes later. I did not need the computer to tell me what it meant. I had studied enough military history to recognize what a glassed planet looks like from 2 light-years away. A slow, spreading warmth where a living world had been. A star that briefly had a second sun. I filed my report in silence. My hands were steady. I have always been good at keeping my hands steady. Over the next 72 hours, the same silence claimed 6 more colonies, then 7. The outer ring of humanity's expansion, 14 worlds that had taken 3 generations to build, to populate, to make into homes, was stripped away in a sweep so organized, so unhurried, that it felt almost administrative. The Varoth conclave did not attack in fury. They attacked the way you clear a field before planting something new. When their communique arrived, translated through 17 linguistic layers into flat, affectless standard, it read exactly the way you would expect a pest control notice to read. The pruning is complete. Expand no further. 4.2 billion people. I read that number so many times in the first week that it stopped feeling like a number and started feeling like a sound. A low, constant sound behind everything else. Behind the emergency council sessions I attended. Behind the briefings I gave. Behind the meals I ate standing up in corridors because sitting down felt wrong, felt like rest, and rest felt like something I no longer had permission for. The combined fleet engaged the Varoth rear guard at Relay Station Calyx 3 weeks later. I was part of that fleet. I want to be precise about what happened, because imprecision would be a kind of dishonesty, and the people who died at Calyx deserve honesty more than they deserve comfortable language. We were destroyed, not defeated, not outmaneuvered. The Varoth kinetic lances punched through cruiser armor the way a needle moves through paper, without resistance, without drama, without the enemy needing to adjust their aim. I watched Admiral Cho's flagship split along its midsection and tumble in 2 directions at once. I watched the Meridian and the Sao Paulo and the Kestrel wing blink off the tactical display like someone was turning off lights. 11 minutes. That is how long it took for half the combined fleet to cease to exist. My frigate survived because the Varoth's targeting systems classified us as debris after our primary engine housing was hit. We drifted, powered down, silent, while the battle ended around us. Then we limped home. I did not cry on the way back. I want to say that I cried and that it helped, but I did not cry, and I am not sure anything would have helped. What I felt was not grief yet. Grief comes when you have time and safety enough to feel it. What I felt was something harder and simpler. I felt it the way you feel the ground under your feet. Solid, undeniable, always there. I returned to Earth and found something I had not expected. I had expected panic. I had expected the political structures to crack under the weight of what had happened. Expected protests and morning broadcasts and desperate diplomatic overtures. There were some of those things. But underneath them, in the streets, in the faces of people going about the small business of surviving each day, there was something else. A stillness. Not the stillness of despair, but the stillness of decision. The particular quiet of someone who has already made up their mind and is simply waiting for the moment to act on it. It frightened me more than the panic would have. The continuance, the emergency governing body that replaced the Security Council, summoned me along with a selection of surviving senior officers to a classified briefing. We were taken to the far side of the moon on a shuttle with blacked-out windows. I remember that detail clearly. Blacked-out windows, as though the destination needed to be protected from our eyes until we arrived, as though the sight of it through a porthole might be more than we were ready for. It was. The UNS Prometheus Unbound had been built in the L2 shadow of the moon over 40 years, constructed from the stripped mass of 3 asteroid belts and 2 dead moons, assembled in sections by crews who had signed confidentiality agreements so extreme that their own families did not know what they were building. It was not a warship in any sense I had a word for. The largest warship in human history before that moment was the carrier Endurance, 2 kilometers long and capable of fielding 300 fighter craft. Prometheus Unbound was 400 kilometers across at its widest point. It had 12 independent rail cannon arrays, capable of firing rounds at a significant fraction of the speed of light. It housed a crew of 2.2 million people. It had a gravitational distortion drive that no other species in the known galaxy had ever seen deployed, because humanity had developed it in secret and then hidden the research for 3 decades, waiting. I stood at the observation window of the shuttle as we came around the moon's edge and saw it for the first time, and I said the only thing that came to me. That's not a warship, that's a statement. Fleet Director Osei, sitting behind me, said quietly, "Yes, that's exactly what it is." I did not sleep the night before we boarded. I spent most of it in an argument with Dr. Sona Marek, the ship's designated ethicist, a position that had apparently been built into the Prometheus Unbound's command structure from the very beginning, which told me something important about how seriously humanity had thought this through. Dr. Marek was a small woman with the kind of patience that made you feel like she was always waiting for you to finish a sentence you had not started yet. "We're not talking about a military target," I told her. "The Vareth Conclave is 80 billion people across 40 worlds. If this goes wrong, it won't go wrong in the direction you're worried about," she said. "The plan isn't to fire at anything. The plan," I said, "is to show up with the ability to fire at everything. That's not a neutral act." "No," she agreed. It isn't. But tell me, what neutral act would you suggest?" I did not have an answer. That was the problem. I had spent 3 weeks turning the question over in my mind, looking for a third option between submission and escalation, and I had not found one. Not one that acknowledged what had actually happened. Not one that treated 4.2 billion dead people as something other than an acceptable loss. I accepted my commission. I am still not certain I made the right choice. I have decided that living with uncertainty is part of the job. The gravity drive activation was not subtle. When Prometheus Unbound tore through space and reappeared in the Vareth home system 19 minutes later, the gravitational ripple was detectable across 400 light-years. Every spacefaring species in the local cluster received the same data simultaneously. A mass object the size of Earth's moon had vanished from the Sol system and appeared, without warning, in the heart of Vareth territory. The galactic community erupted. Communication channels that humanity had never accessed before suddenly lit up with hails from species we had only read about in long-range survey reports, all of them asking variants of the same question. "What are you doing?" I was the one who answered. It was logged as an official communication record, which means it will exist in the Galactic Archive for as long as there is a Galactic Archive. I kept it short. 1 word, in standard, transmitted on every open frequency. Responding. The Vareth went to full combat posture within minutes. 4,000 warships moved into formation around us. Planetary defense arrays came online across their home system. A weapon they called the Still Point, designed, according to intelligence we had gathered, to collapse a star, was aimed at Prometheus Unbound and fired. I watched it hit. I want you to understand what that moment felt like from inside the ship. The impact registered on internal sensors as a gravitational event. The Still Point's energy struck our hull and was absorbed, partially redirected, partially reflected. The ship shuddered, not violently, the way a damaged vessel shudders, but the way a mountain shudders when something very large leans against it. Then the shudder stopped. The hull integrity displays stayed green. The crew around me said nothing for approximately 4 seconds. Then someone behind me let out a long, slow breath, and someone else laughed, not from happiness, but from the release of a fear they had been carrying for weeks. The Vareth command channel went silent. I had studied the Vareth language extensively in the months of transit. I knew their communication patterns well enough to understand what that silence meant. They did not have a word for what they were experiencing, not because they lacked vocabulary. They were an ancient, sophisticated civilization, but because they had never needed one. They had never encountered a situation where the expected outcome did not occur, where the thing they had aimed their most powerful weapon at simply remained. We transmitted our position statement 12 minutes after the still point impact. The full record of the 14 glassed colonies. The confirmed death count. The Vareth Conclave's own communique, played back to them in their original language. And then a single demand: stand trial before an interstellar tribunal, on terms to be negotiated, or we will demonstrate on one uninhabited world of our choosing what Prometheus Unbound is capable of. 72 hours to respond. I drafted the message myself. I did not sleep for the duration of the countdown. At the 14-hour mark, Chief Engineer Lev Caro led a group of 47 crew members through the emergency access corridors toward the primary rail cannon control center. I know because the ship's internal monitoring flagged the movement and routed the alert to my station. I know because I was the one who went after him. Caro had lost his wife, his 2 daughters, and his mother on Varus. He had said almost nothing about it in the month since. He had done his job with complete precision, maintained his systems, submitted his reports on time. He had been, by every measurable standard, a model officer, and he had been walking toward the rail cannon controls with the quiet, focused intent of a man who had decided that justice was too slow and too uncertain, and that the only response to what had been done to his family was something immediate and total. I caught him in Corridor J7, 3 levels below the control center. He was not surprised to see me. I think some part of him had expected someone to come. We fought. I will not describe it in detail, because that is not the part that matters. What matters is that I won, and that when it was over, and Caro was sitting against the corridor wall with his head down, I sat next to him and did not call security. He cried for a long time. I sat with him. Eventually he said, "They burned my kids." "I know," I said. "Then why are we waiting? Why are we giving them 72 hours? Why do they get anything?" I thought about that for a moment. I wanted to give him a real answer, not a policy position. "Because the moment we stop giving them anything," I said, "we've decided that's how it works. That's how it works for everyone, including us." He did not say anything for a while. Then, "That's not enough." "No," I agreed. "It isn't, but it's what we have." I did not report the mutiny attempt. I have thought about that decision many times. I believe it was the right one. I am open to being wrong. With 6 minutes left on the countdown, the Vareth High Speaker broadcast a response on all frequencies. The message was delivered in halting, imperfect standard, a language they had never bothered to learn before, because they had never before considered that they might need to address us directly. They agreed to the tribunal. Not because they had developed a conscience in 72 hours. Not because they suddenly understood the weight of what they had done. They agreed because they had looked at Prometheus Unbound, and at the choice humanity had made not to fire it, and they had recognized something they could not fully name. The distinction between a species that could destroy you, and a species that chooses not to. They had encountered that distinction for the first time, and it had rearranged something in their understanding of the universe. In the galactic record of that exchange, it was the first time a Varath leader had ever used the word equal in reference to another species. I noticed that. I suspect everyone noticed that. The tribunal was imperfect. All real things are. 2 of the 3 convicted high speakers accepted their sentences without protest. The 3rd acquittal was on procedural grounds that we contested, and then, ultimately, accepted. Because the whole point of a legal process is that it applies even when you dislike the outcome. Prometheus Unbound returned to Sol and was placed in permanent lunar orbit. Not hidden, not decommissioned. Visible from Earth on a clear night, a slow-moving point of light that everyone can see and that everyone understands. I stood at the forward observation dome on the day we arrived back, looking at Earth from above, the blue and white and brown of it, impossibly beautiful, carrying all 4.2 billion of its losses inside it, like a stone in a pocket. I thought about Caro, who had received a dishonorable discharge and a therapist, and had apparently, according to a message I received 6 months later, started teaching engineering at a school on one of the surviving outer colonies. I thought about Dr. Merrick, who was already writing the framework for what would become the Interstellar Conduct Accords. I thought about Admiral Cho, tumbling in two directions at once. I had learned, through the translation archives, that the Verith eventually developed a phrase for what humanity was. It translated, roughly, as the patient fury. A species that waits, and builds, and remembers, and then arrives. I decided I could live with that. The stars were still there outside the dome, still countless, still waiting. And humanity was still reaching toward them, one careful, stubborn step at a time, watched now by a galaxy that knew exactly what it was watching, and had chosen, for the first time, to make room.